The fog crept over the lake like a blanket of silence, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Only the faintest ripple of water betrayed any sign of life. In the dense mist, a woman's scream pierced the air, then abruptly stopped. No echo, no trace, just gone. There was no one to hear her. The residents of Greystone had always whispered about the fog. No one liked to go near the lake at night, especially when the mist rolled in thick, like it had a life of its own. They said it wasn't natural, that strange things happened when the fog came in too thick, but no one could ever prove it. The lake had always been calm, serene even during the day, but the mist was a different beast, unpredictable and eerie. Then, one by one, people began to vanish. The disappearances were subtle at first. A lone fisherman, his boat found drifting aimlessly the next morning, bobbing along the shore with no sign of its owner. A hiker who had set out for a trek along the misty trails, never to return. Their families mourned, but without evidence or explanation, the lake itself became a place of fear and avoidance. Stories grew, dark, twisted tales of lost souls wandering through the fog, their voices calling out for help, never to be seen again. Lucy Harris was the first to truly believe in the stories, though she never told anyone why. She hadn't dared to, not until the night her brother, Tim, vanished without a trace. It was the fog that took him. At least, that's what she believed. Tim had gone down to the lake to retrieve a fishing net they'd left the day before. The fog had rolled in earlier than usual, but he'd said he'd be quick. Lucy waited on the porch, shivering as the temperature dropped. Minutes passed, then an hour. She called his name, but only the fog answered, curling its thick tendrils toward her feet like icy fingers. She never saw him again. No one believed her when she said the fog was alive. Years passed, but Lucy never forgot. Her brother's disappearance haunted her dreams, waking her in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, hearing his voice calling her name from deep within the mist. She moved away from Greystone, unable to face the lake that had swallowed her brother, but she couldn't outrun the memories. It wasn't until she returned for her mother's funeral that the nightmares started again, more vivid and terrifying than before. Each night, Tim appeared in her dreams, his face pale and drawn, his eyes wide with fear. "Help me, Lucy," he whispered, his voice cracking, desperate. "I'm still here." The morning after the funeral, Lucy stood at the edge of the lake, the fog heavy and swirling around her feet. She hadn't set foot here in nearly 10 years, but the mist felt familiar, like a long-lost companion. And yet, it was different, thicker, colder, and more menacing. She heard it then, a voice, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the fog. Lucy. It was Tim. She knew it was him. Fear knotted her stomach, but a strange compulsion drew her closer to the water's edge. She leaned forward, straining to hear the voice again. "Lucy, help me." She stumbled back, her heart pounding. "Tim," she called, her voice trembling. The fog responded, coiling around her ankles. She turned to leave, but the fog seemed to tighten, pulling her toward the lake. Suddenly, a shadow moved within the mist, a figure, blurry and indistinct. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. Was it Tim, or something else? Lucy wasn't the only one who had heard the voices. Over the years, there had been whispers of an entire town that had vanished into the fog. Greystone wasn't always just a quiet village by the lake. Decades ago, there had been a settlement deep within the forest on the opposite side of the water, a bustling town called Ash Hollow. One night, during a particularly thick fog, the town had simply vanished. Houses, people, everything, gone. No one could explain what had happened. Those who ventured into the forest to find the town never returned. The town became a ghost story, a tale parents told their children to keep them from wandering too far into the woods. But Lucy's grandmother had told her that Ash Hollow wasn't just a story. She had grown up hearing that those who disappeared in the fog weren't lost. They were taken. Lucy hadn't believed it back then, but standing on the edge of the lake now, she wasn't so sure. Determined to find answers, Lucy began searching through old records, piecing together fragments of history about Ash Hollow and the mysterious disappearances. The more she learned, the more unsettling the truth became. There were references to a series of strange rituals performed by the town's inhabitants, rituals to summon spirits from the lake. Some believed the fog was a gateway, a portal to the other side, and that the people of Ash Hollow had crossed over, never to return. But why? The answer came in an old journal she found in her grandmother's attic. The journal belonged to one of the last residents of Ash Hollow, a man named Elias Granger. His final entry sent chills down Lucy's spine. The fog is not of this world. It is a veil between life and death. They are coming for us. We have angered them, and now we must pay. The lake demands a sacrifice, and we are all that's left. We have tried to appease it, but the spirits are restless. They are waiting, and soon they will take us all. That night, Lucy dreamed of the lake again, but this time it was not just her brother calling to her. Dozens of voices echoed through the mist, pleading, crying, begging for release. The fog swirled around her, pulling her toward the water's edge. And then she saw them, figures shadowy and indistinct, reaching out with desperate hands. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. She couldn't stay in Greystone any longer, but she couldn't leave without knowing the truth. She had to go back to the lake. She had to find out what had happened to Tim, and to the others who had vanished. The next morning, she packed a small bag and set off toward the lake, her heart heavy with dread. The fog was already thick, rolling in earlier than usual, as if it knew she was coming. As she reached the shore, the air grew colder, and the mist seemed to close in around her. The lake was eerily silent, not a single ripple disturbing its surface. Lucy stood at the water's edge, her breath visible in the freezing air. She called out, her voice trembling, "Tim!" For a moment, there was nothing, just the heavy, oppressive fog. Then she heard it, a low, mournful wail, rising from the depths of the mist. The sound sent a chill down her spine. It was not just Tim's voice. It was a chorus of voices, all calling to her, begging for help. Before she could react, the fog thickened, swirling violently around her. A figure emerged from the mist, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "Who are you?" Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible. The figure stepped closer, his cold breath brushing against her cheek. "I am the keeper of the lost," he whispered, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "And you have come to join them." Lucy stumbled backward, her heart racing. "I don't belong here," she cried, her voice shaking. "I'm not one of them." The man's smile widened, revealing sharp, rotting teeth. "You've been marked since the day your brother vanished. The fog has claimed him, and now it claims you." Lucy turned to run, but the fog was everywhere, wrapping around her like a living thing. She felt its cold grip tighten, pulling her back toward the lake. In a moment of sheer terror, she understood. The fog wasn't just mist. It was alive, an ancient force, hungry for souls. The lost souls of Ash Hollow hadn't simply vanished. They had been taken by the fog, trapped in a limbo between worlds, unable to move on. And now, it wanted her too. But Lucy wasn't ready to give up. Summoning all her strength, she fought against the fog, her mind racing for a way out. She remembered the journal, the rituals. If the people of Ash Hollow had summoned the fog, perhaps they had also found a way to stop it. Desperately, she whispered the words she had read in the journal, a prayer to the spirits of the lake, begging for mercy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the fog began to recede, slowly unraveling its grip. The figure in the mist let out a furious scream, his body dissolving into the vapor as the mist pulled away. Lucy fell to her knees, gasping for breath. The fog was lifting, the air clearing. She could see the lake again, its surface calm and still. But the voices, they were still there, faint and distant, calling to her from the depths of the mist. The fog had receded, but it wasn't gone. Lucy could feel it lurking at the edges of the lake, waiting for its next victim. She knew it wouldn't stop, not until it had claimed enough souls to satisfy its hunger. As she stood at the water's edge, a chilling thought crossed her mind. The fog wanted her. It had always wanted her. Ever since the day Tim had disappeared, she had been marked, just as the people of Ash Hollow had been marked. There was only one way to stop it. Lucy took a deep breath, her decision made. She would give the fog what it wanted. She would be the final sacrifice. Stepping into the cold, still waters of the lake, she felt the fog begin to close in around her, its icy tendrils wrapping around her body. The voices of the lost souls grew louder, their cries echoing in her ears. But Lucy wasn't afraid anymore. As the fog swallowed her whole, she whispered a final prayer for the lost souls of Ash Hollow and for her brother. Then there was silence. Years passed, and the lake at Greystone remained as quiet and serene as ever. The disappearances stopped, and the fog seemed to have lost its power. But every now and then, on particularly cold, misty nights, the people of Greystone swear they can hear voices, whispers carried on the wind, calling out from the depths of the fog. And if you stand by the lake long enough, you might just see a figure in the mist, waiting for you to join them.